Welfare Secretary Erwin Tulfo is set to be bypassed by the Commission on Appointments for a second time. CA Chairman and Senate President Miguel Zubiri said they need more time to tackle Tulfo's citizenship along with other issues.
We need to get a certification that is no longer an American citizen. Parang kulang. Kulang yung documentation. If he can just give us documentary proof that he's no longer, a certification that he's no longer an American citizen, as he admitted to us that he's been, it was only 2021 when he utilized his American, or he still had his American passport. So medyo conflicting yung information, kaya hintayin natin yung susunod na hearing.
The fate of Erwin Tulfo as a government official hangs in the balance. The DSWD Secretary is looking at a second bypass in the powerful Commission on Appointments over issues about his citizenship and the libel conviction. Is this a case of three strikes and Tulfo is out? Or can legal opinion still save the Social Welfare Secretary appointed by President Bongbong Marcos? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay at kasama po natin dito sa studio Ed Lingao of One News, and from Manila, the Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star, Ami Pamintuan. Chiefs, good evening.
Good evening.
Happy Tuesday.
Ami, mukhang matutuloy ang Maharlika Investment Fund.
Oo nga, mahigit 200 na yung mga supporters sa House, ano? Pero aakit pa naman yung sa Senado, so well, saka mga 100 pa yung members sa House, ano? So, marami pang pwedeng mangyari.
Well, hindi lang supporters yung 216. Supposedly, they want to be co-authors of the bill. So they don't just want to vote on it, they also want to be listed as co-authoring the bill itself.
And if it's any other sign, kanina kausap natin sa The Big Story, kausap namin si Congressman Paul Daza. Tandaan nyo, last week, he was right there fighting the lonely fight, raising all the red flags about this. Pero ngayon, he's endorsing it. He's saying na all the safeguards are in place, there's enough amendments, and sabi niya, he will actually vote for this bill.
Sinunod naman daw kasi yung mga recommendation ng opposition and all those sectors na concerned about the bill. So, tingnan natin kung anong kalalabasan. Kasi ang dami-dami siyang binabago, di ba?
Oo, kasi ngayon now people are still focusing on the same issues pa rin, essentially, di ba? The fiscal side at saka the governance side, particularly mas malawak na usapin na rule of law on whether or not our institutions can actually handle a fund like this.
And whether we can afford taking the gamble, because it is a gamble. Sabi nga ni Stephen Kunyeng, an investment banker that we talked to, who also has handled several investments in similar investment funds, sovereign investment funds, like GIC of Singapore. If I remember right, he figured in at least five investments with GIC, and he's proud to say that he was successful. Sabi niya, in the end, they have to be ready to lose money.
Exactly.
Because, yes, you could make a lot of money, but you could also lose a lot of money. And it's a big gamble. Sabi nga niya, he gave figures, 80%, around 80% daw of investments of sovereign wealth funds don't make money. 20% do. But when they do, malaki-laking kinikita.
Including the stars that they point out, diba? Norway, Singapore, lahat yan napaso. And we're not even talking about the corruption issues that really tainted Malaysia's
You have Norway with $174 billion in losses. You have Korea with $28 billion in losses.
Singapore lost a $250 million, natalo dyan sa FTX na yan, diba? Anyway, just one other thing before we go to break. Senator Risa Ontiveros has filed a bill to decriminalize libel. Ironically, this comes on the same day that a Baguio journalist, Frank Simato was convicted for cyber libel.
Interesting.
And also, etong ang araw na to, na mukhang mababypass, second bypass na si Secretary Tulfo over a libel conviction partly.
You were saying, Ed?
Well, interesting discussion din yung libel eh. I mean, I think we can devote an entire episode to libel eh. Kasi I think most of us, if not all of us, agree that libel should be decriminalized. However, there are some things that also have to be done at the same time. Kasi in decriminalizing it, it's easier for the courts to
find you guilty.
And to find you guilty.
Kasi binaba mo yung standard of evidence, eh, di ba?
So,
hindi na criminal, so civil.
Baka maraming maghikaw sa mga reporter dyan.
So baka ibaba yung standard, tapos taasan naman yung penalties.
Oo.
Diba?
Yung
Hindi,
US kasi...
mababa na talaga yung standard sa civil. Ang dami-dami natin ganyang demanda. Mas madali talaga kayong mako-convict on a civil charge for libel.
At saka itong kay...
medyo dahan-dahan.
Tsaka ito kay Frank Simato, it's really worth looking at for people watching because precisely this was over a Facebook post.
Yeah.
Diba?
So it's cyber libel ang ang hinatol sa kanya.
Oo, di ba? So and I mean, yes, he is a journalist. He can also argue press freedom and so on. But at the end of the day, this I think pertains to, I mean, you could argue a personal post which opens that gateway and sets everybody on the same slippery slope. Anyway, as Ed said, we'll probably be devoting a whole episode on that, and for that matter, the efforts to decriminalize libel.
Ang US kasi they decriminalized libel in most of the states, but at the same time may Supreme Court jurisprudence kasi on that from 1967 going down.
And speaking of Supreme Court jurisprudence, it's not jurisprudence, but here in the Philippines, the Supreme Court does in fact have a circular.
It encouraging
trial courts not to use the criminal
jail term,
provisions
but,
for
encouraging lang yan, encouraging.
Because it's not yet the law.
Pero in fact, konti lang naman talagang na convict dito criminally for libel. And some quarters are expressing concern na siyempre, meron din naman mga licensed members ng media at baka daw kapag nawala yung criminal aspect, baka daw lalong mawawala naman daw ng redress yung iba na talaga daw na-aggrieve. So, ayan, mga pag-uusapan din yan in this proposal.
Yan naman talaga yung balancing act dyan. I mean, it's not a balancing act in the sense that clearly our own Constitution has a very clear bias for the Bill of Rights, in particular free expression and so on. That's why the standard for trying to prove criminal libel has to be very, very high. But we've seen it not just in the Philippines, but in many, many other countries. The unintended consequence of relying on civil defamation. Pagkatapos, if you have the unbridled enthusiasm of different interests.
Enthusiasm.
Diba? To still counter. Then baka daanin sa pera. Baka patayin ka. Hindi ka nga kulong. Patayin ka naman sa penalties. Diba? So,
bankrupt ka. Ang mamahal yan. Ang mga fines dyan, ilang beses na kami na-fine. Mga typical fine dyan is 5 million.
Anyway, so that's why kanina, among other statements, we see a lot of advocacy groups, the NUJP in particular, again, reiterating this is precisely why with every criminal libel case, we have a reason to keep revisiting precisely this bill of Senator Ontiveros and other legislators to decriminalize libel in the Philippines.
Yeah, but yun nga, not just to decriminalize, but as well to institute more reforms into the libel laws.
Okay.
For example, the issue of malice in libel, it's one of the few, if not the only law we have in the revised penal code that presumes you to be guilty, and you have to prove your innocence or your lack of malice, to be more exact about it.
Okay, so dalawang
because you're presumed to be malicious until you prove yourself to be not malicious.
So dalawang episodes na yan na nakabangko, but for now we will have our episode for today will start with the issues confronting the appointment of Erwin Tulfo as Social Welfare Secretary. We'll be speaking to our first guest after a quick break. Stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. Welcome back to the cheese. What's the holdup in the confirmation of Erwin Tulfo as DSWD Secretary? Let's ask Commission on Appointments Member Representative Johnny Pimentel. Sir, welcome to the cheese.
Yes, magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.
Yes, sir.
Magandang gabi po. Sir, maybe let's start with how the hearings and the confirmation hearings ended today. Ano po bang status ng appointment ni Secretary Erwin Tulfo?
No, this afternoon, ang dineliberate po natin was the ad interim appointment of Secretary Jaime Bautista, Secretary Balisacan, and Secretary there was another one. So, Jerry Acosar pala, no, sa housing. So yung tatlo ang dineliberate natin, and we already recommended for their confirmation sa deliberations. But due to material lack of time, doon na namin ang plenary namin tomorrow na, no? So tomorrow morning, after we still have two COMELEC commissioners, si Commissioner Nelson Celis and Commissioner Ernest Maceda. After the deliberation of these two COMELEC commissioners, then we'll go to the plenary session. Then sabay-sabay na po sila i-confirm doon sa plenary session. Now yung kay Erwin Tulfo and Secretary Pascual, naka-differ na sila. They will have to be deliberated if ever that they will be reappointed, on the resumption of Congress na that will be on January 22 or the last week of January.
Okay.
Yun po. So actually, once the three secretaries that were approved on the hearing kanina will be confirmed tomorrow, so actually 5 na lang talaga may iwan, which is DA, DOH, DTI, and then there's another one pa. Mga
Yes,
5
sir.
na sila.
Sir,
DND.
Apa, thank you po for the updates. In any case, we are aware that at least two major issues are lined up against the confirmation of Erwin Tulfo. The first one muna, yung sa citizenship. The other one is libel cases niya. Pero yung sa citizenship, may kalinawan na po ba tayo doon, particularly on whether or not he has renounced his U.S. citizenship?
Actually, medyo it's very complicated, and Secretary Tulfo asked for an executive session regarding his renouncement of the U.S. citizenship. It would be very hard for me to explain, and since it's an executive session, it would be hard for me to divulge it publicly, no? But anyway, there are two issues, of course. First is the conviction of 4 counts of libel by the Supreme Court. That is one issue, and the U.S. citizenship. Well, I talked with Senate President Mitch Subiri this afternoon. If ever na masasalang uli sa deliberation sa Commission on Appointments Secretary Erwin Tulfo, maybe we will ask comments or legal opinion. Hello?
Yes, sir. We're still here, sir.
Yes, that would be the direction that we would pursue if, yun nga, kasi this is the second bypass for both Secretary Pascual and Secretary Erwin Tulfo. So that would mean, under our rules, if they are bypassed, then they have to be reappointed. Hanggang third, ano na lang po tayo, no?
Yes,
and then
sir.
we will have to take a vote on the third deliberations.
Yes, sir. Sir, pasensya na po. Of course, we are not lawyers here. Pero how complicated could the question be po? I suppose that's a question on everybody's mind, especially the layman. Whether or not he is a Filipino citizen or a dual Filipino-American citizen.
The facts of this issue was divulged in an executive session.
Yes, sir.
Meaning, it was only the members of the commission appointments present, and of course, Secretary Tulfo. I don't know if I will be in a position to, of course, divulge it publicly because it was an executive session. I'm sorry to.
Yes, sir.
I regret
yes, sir. We understand, sir.
I cannot divulge what transpired during the executive session. What I can just tell you, generally, it was about the U.S. citizenship.
Yes, sir. Sir, we understand, sir, you cannot divulge the details and perhaps you cannot divulge the process. Pero baka at the very least, you can tell us kung ano yung ending. Siya ba'y Pilipino o Pilam?
Dagdagan ko lang po yun because kanina kausap namin si former Senator Frank Drilon. And one of the things he said is, there is a process to renounce. And he said at the end of that process, essentially, I don't know what the exact term is, but at the end of that process, you can get a certification just to answer the question with a yes or a no, effectively. I guess yun yung tanong ni Ed, channeling the questions of a lot of people.
Unfortunately, it's more complicated than that. And sabi ko, executive session yun, the details I cannot divulge. But it is with regard to his renouncement of his citizenship.
So by that you mean that he did renounce or he did try to renounce his citizenship, his U.S. citizenship. Ang question lang,
Yes,
I suppose, is whether or not it has been accepted or it has been finalized.
I'd rather not.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Yes, sir. At least clear lang niyo po yun na nag-renounce na siya.
It was divulged to us in an executive session.
Yes, sir.
And it would be not prudent for me to tell you also what transpired.
Yes, sir.
Sige, sir. Yung isang issue na lang, sir.
I think that's good enough that I'm telling you that there are two issues concerned, one of which is the conviction in Supreme Court, and one of which is the question regarding his U.S. citizenship.
Yes, sir.
Yun na nga, Congressman, doon na tayo dun sa libel conviction naman kasi ang sabi ni Senate President Mig Zubiri kasi it's a crime of moral turpitude Sino bang, ano bang rules niyo sa ganyang mga...
Yes, but that is debatable, no? Okay.
Yes, yun na
moral turpitude, there is a penalty, perpetual disqualification
Yes.
From public office. Now, for an elective office, there is a prescription period, no? You are disqualified from running for public office, but after 5 years, pwede na kayong tumakbo. Now, there's a gray area on this, no? That penalty, there are some legal luminaries are saying na it is only applicable to an elective position, but it's not applicable to a appointed position. So, just like you, I'm not a lawyer, but there are two sides or two opinions that we got, or I personally got from different lawyers, no? So, there is a gray area. It is specific. This happened in the case of, if you remember, Congressman Philip Pichay. He was convicted of moral turpitude.
Yes.
Na-disqualify siya, tinanggal siya pagka-congressman 2 months before his term ended. But after 5 years, he was able to run as mayor of a certain municipality. So yung prescription period natapos na. The question is, applicable ba ito sa appointed position?
Yes.
That is, has to be cleared, no? So there's a gray area.
Paano nyo mariresolve yan, Congressman? By vote ba yan? Ng Commission on Appointments? Paano nyo mariresolve yung gray area?
Yung sa U.S. citizenship, if ever masasala ulit si Secretary Erwin Tulfo, the Senate President has said, we will invite some of the Supreme Court justices to give us an opinion on it. Kasi mahirap po yun eh. Medyo it's very, very complicated. So we will seek advice from them also. And well, included na siguro yung sa conviction din, no? Because as I've said, there's a gray area on that matter. It is not very clear whether it is applicable to an appointed position.
Paano kung hindi po pumayag yung Supreme Court justices? Because the issue might go to the Supreme Court.
Abot sa kanila.
Baka sabihin nila yun eh.
Let me be very clear. We will just ask their opinion, no? Hindi pa naman na wala namang kasong ipapile doon or what. We'll just seek their legal opinion, and I don't think they will deny our request since we are co-equal branches of government. It is only a request to enlighten us so that we could proceed with the deliberations. Mahirap po yun. Kailangan talaga may legal opinion po tayo.
Hindi, kasi nga baka nga i-challenge whatever your decision, saka sakali, baka i-challenge before the Supreme Court.
Aabot sa kanila.
Nag-issue na sila sa inyo ng opinion, pwede silang na maginhigit na kayo, na ganun na kayo.
Well, if not from the Supreme Court justice, we'll get a really very good legal luminary who could enlighten us with regards to this matter. Kasi very complicated. The two issues are very complicated. So kailangan talaga natin ng mga legal minds para to set the legal parameters, ano? Para so that we can decide. But actually, what we are talking about is only purely hypothetical. Because yun na nga, na-bypass na sila, we do not even know if President Marcos will reappoint them or not. So if they will not be reappointed, those who were bypassed, so the question is moot and academic, di ba? But if they will be reappointed, then we will have to seek a legal opinion.
Okay. Congressman Johnny Pimentel, sir, maraming salamat po.
Thank you,
Okay.
Congressman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you po. Thank you po.
Okay. Congressman Pimentel, of course, is Surigao Del Sur representative at the House of Representatives. And we will start up another conversation after this break. Keep it here on One News.
Earlier, we were just talking about how we've got to do an episode or two about decriminalizing libel. Well, let's get the ball rolling now. Joining us today or tonight is Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility Trustee Vergel Santos. Mr. Santos, welcome back to the Chiefs.
Hi, thanks, guys. Good evening.
Good to have you back on board, sir. Sir, we were just talking about the case of Frank Simatu, who was convicted for cyber libel today. And of course, the renewed calls for the decriminalization of libel. Pero we've been talking about this for decades already.
Yes.
Are we making any headway in this discussion?
We will never probably gain much headway so long as the issue will have to be resolved in Congress, you know, and these are people who are potential target of press criticism, and therefore could always use a law like that to deploy against the media. So it will be difficult, of course. Although, if you ask me, it should have been that It's not only decriminalization. I think decriminalization is the least that can be done in making the relationship between the intended relationship, intended constitutionally, between news sources and subjects and the media. That is the least that can be done. If you ask me, I'd prefer that it be scrapped altogether.
Pero sir, ano pa yung iba? Kasi kanina we were having discussion about yung decriminalization ng libel, and if it's just simply a decriminalization per se, then that may also lead to other concerns as well. Bababa yung bar for finding guilty a person for civil libel naman. At baka maraming makasuhan at
Gagamitin din yan eh. Kaya nga sabi ko, scrap na lang yan eh. Because ang nakikinabang lang naman dyan, news subjects at news sources eh. You think that law is for everybody? Have you seen anyone that you have met out there in the street na pinakinabangan yung batas na yan? Hindi eh. Yung batas na yan, pinakinabangan lang yan ng people who should be watched precisely by the press, and the press in effect is hampered by the law. Wala namang nakikinabang, sila lang nakikinabang eh. They are supposed, public officials, people in wealth, authority and power should be fair game.
Yeah.
For the press.
Yeah.
That is an idea.
Mr. Santos, one thing that we did talk about kanina, you talked about, ultimately Congress has to pass that law. But in the absence of any act to decriminalize libel, we do know that the Supreme Court does have a circular encouraging or discouraging the courts from staying away from the penal penalties, from the criminal penalties for libel. I'm just wondering if pinakikinggan ba ng mga korte yung Supreme Court? Is the CMFR monitoring this, in other words, the way that memorandum is being heeded or not?
Bakit pakikinggan ng Congress yan kung ang Congress makikinabang?
Hindi, ng mga korte. Ng mga korte. I'm just wondering if because CMFR, I know, monitors, ng mga korte.
Ng mga korte mismo. Nakikita natin, hindi eh. Well, I am wondering whether the Supreme Court itself has any true sway over its own courts. Kasi nakikita natin lahat eh, no? But until there is an act, a law, scrapping that law, walang mangyayari yan. Gagamitin at gagamitin din. And given the very real problem of corruption in every level on every level of government, including the courts, you can imagine that this law can be used against news people by foul means. Nangyayari na eh. So mahirap talaga eh. By the way, even groups of lawyers, the national organizations of lawyers themselves are saying that the libel law, which is 100 years old, by the way, has become an anachronistic law. Because there are, after all, other laws that have been passed that could be invoked whenever damage to reputation happens. So sila mismo, lawyers mismo, ayaw na nila eh. Kaya lang, hanggat nandyan yung batas na yan, magagamit. The mere fact that the law is there, the potential exists of harassment against news people, and by harassing news people, that by itself it defeats the purpose of the constitutional purpose of having the press as watchdog on the powers that be. So hindi pinapakinabangan talaga.
Pero may concern din, yun nga, binanggit na rin ni Ed, yung kapag na-decriminalize daw, mas madali daw namang kaya mas dadami yung conviction for civil damages. And it can be very expensive, lalo na dun sa mga maliit na drive them into bankruptcy. At saka pwede rin actually gamitin harassment yun in civil cases. Nawala siya yun.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
We can hear you.
Actually, basta may batas. Kaya decriminalize yan, kung hindi, kung ano man ang pakikinabangan ng new sources at new subjects sa batas, gagamitin yan eh. Kaya nga ang sa akin is, tanggalin na lang yan.
Yeah.
Hindi ba?
And you
Kasi
may-
gagamitin kahit ano pa yan eh.
And you made that point kanina, no, Virgil. And as you said, there are lawyers pointing out that, even kung walang libel laws, that there are avenues for people who with legitimate concerns. But maybe give us an example. Give us an example. Kung walang libel law, and I feel to agree, then para kailangan ko naman pagtanggol yung pangalan at karangalan
I think
ko. What options do I have?
you can file a civil suit for damage to reputation. It's civil also. In fact, hanggat meron niya, magagawa pa rin yan di ba? Ang sa akin is that kahit ano pa yung batas na nandyan na pwedeng gamitin ng new sources, new subjects na gamitin nila. Ang hinahabol lang natin, tanggalin natin isa-isa. Ang unahin natin itong libel. Gagamitin at gagamitin pa rin. Tingnan mo, never mind yung libel. Lahat tayo nire-red tag eh. Hindi na libelo yan eh. That's yet another law. The Anti-Terrorism Act, which by the way is unable to define the law that it punishes specifically. And lawyers themselves are saying, hindi mo kailangan yan. Kasi again, may mga batas na pwedeng invoke para gamitin sa mga ganyang violations. Ganun pa rin. Ang sa akin lang is that to make life easier and easier for ourselves, it will always be hard when you are dealing with people in power, people in wealth, people in authority. It is by itself hard enough kahit wala niyang mga batas na yan. Meron pa nga gagamitin. So ang sa akin lang is, kung anong pwede natin tanggalin na.
Yeah.
Para naman hindi tayo mahirapang kamukha niyan. Kasi, as it is talaga, hirap ang mga periodista Natatakot talaga yan. Whatever law there is that can be deployed by people, by the powers that be against journalists, they will.
Pero sir, other countries...
Kahit anong law whatever law is existing there, gagamitin.
Yes.
Talagang
Also,
someone wants to go after you. So tanong ko na lang, what do you think we're into the 6th month of a new administration? And alam naman natin yung background neto, yung bagong Pangulo na. What do you think of the situation of mass media under the new dispensation?
Kasi ito walang ginagawang walang active harassment, walang active ways of making life difficult for news people. Wala pa tayong nakikita Wala man tayong nakikita. Ang problema natin, dahil wala tayong nakikita, ang tingin ko kaya lang walang nakikita kasi hindi naman yung media, the media are not doing bold enough watching of these powers that be. Kasi kamukha niyan, papayagan ka ni Presidente Marcos kung ano ang gawin mo kasi wala ka namang ginagawang laban sa kanya like for instance, hindi niya sinasagot, babayaran ba yung 203 billion? Dapat nire-report natin yan at sinasabi natin, araw-araw na hindi sinasagot, na hindi pa rin sinasagot, ayaw pa rin bayaran. Dapat ganun So, dapat tuloy-tuloy ang reporting and sabi ko nga at another time binibigyan tayo ng giving the impression na may ginagawa yung gobyerno. Magpapalabas ng 5,000 old and sick na prisoners. So, happy na yung bayan, Pero si Laila de Lima nakakulong hindi pa nga convicted trapped up charges Sasabihin sa'yo na merong isang pulis na kinasuhan sa drug war na na-convict. Iisa lang yun And libo-libo namamatay doon sa drug war. Wala namang nakasuhan. Pagkatapos yung si Bantag, si Bantag mismo nagsasabi, the people above him, more powerful. Why is he being singled out? I mean, that man is actually hinting that he was not going down alone. Look at that. Binibigyan lang tayo ng ganun pero hindi natin kinu-question So, doon lang makikita mo na after the Duterte regime, nagkaroon na talaga ng medyo nagdadahan-dahan ng mga periodista. So, ngayon pinag-usapan natin ang libel na meron na namang nakasuhan ng libel. May mga nababarig pa nga bukod diyan. Pero ang tingin natin, itong gobyernong ito may mga concessions. Anong klaseng concessions ba yan? Pero hindi naman natin nire-report. Ibig ko sabihin, walang reporting in perspective, in-depth, contextualized reporting para ipakita na itong gobyernong to in the first place, what we have today is a president who happens to be bred, reared, and had practiced in power during martial law. Hindi natin sinasabi yun If only to put in perspective what sort of presidency we have today. Kulang Pero ang tingin ko kaya nagdadahan-dahan, medyo the chill is real across the media profession ang pinag-uusapan natin yung libelo, that is malaking bagay yan na nakaka-hamper sa exercise ng ating profession. So sa akin, hangga't maaari tanggalin natin yung pwedeng tanggalin diyan para naman maibsan-ibsan yung ating hirap.
Yes,
bilang mga mamamayag.
Pero sir, other countries have their own set of libel laws, even first world countries. I'm wondering lang, sir, if when you say scrap the libel law, do you mean scrap the existing libel law and replace it with the
I don't know if you need to replace that. Some lawyers are saying you don't need to. Ang sa akin naman, it is a false equivalency yung sabihin mo na sa ibang first world countries, yung mga tao doon nakakaintindi, ang mga institutions gumagana You are looking at a country where a basic question is whether there is a rule of law. And countries where a case can be made that there is. So walang equivalency, At saka yung institutions, ibig kong sabihin, the institutions that support, for instance, media practice or certain freedoms are alive and well, but not in our case. You can see even in Duterte's presidency and possibly in this one that the Congress. Certain courts and certainly the Senate and the House of Representatives and other institutions have been co-opted by the executive. So walang Ako lagi kong tinitingnan I always look at our own case separately kasi nga wala akong makitang tunay na equivalency except with other third world countries where the press hirap na hirap talaga.
Okay,
at may chill talaga.
Virgel, Mr. Santos, we're almost out of time, so ganito na lang yung tanong ko. As you said, until we have a law, from a Congress that is very unlikely to vote against self-interest. Di ba?
Yes.
Then, saan tayo lulugar?
Wala, force to good tayo. Wala tayong magagawa. Talagang pa-practicein lang natin. Practice profession natin. I mean, we had better come to terms with the realities of the situation na na kailangan mong na nasa sayo na yun how far you wish to push that line of freedom or how long you want to hold that line. Ano? Nasa sayo na yun eh. Nagkataon nga gano'n na ngayon eh. Kasi even together, especially the media are not together in this, by the way, no? Hindi naman tayo pare-pareho dito eh, no? Kasi yung media nga may na-co-op din eh. Ano? Marami na rin na-co-opt eh. Ano? So not only co-opted, but actually actively supporting instead of watching the powers that be. Ano? So talagang napakahirap ng posisyon natin. Kaya ako pag tinatanong, sinasabi ko lang mangyayari yan, kanya-kanya yan talaga eh. Ano, hanggang saan ka ba tatagal? Ganun yan eh. No? And it's always the case. And sometimes, nagkakaroon ka ng chance na merong lumalaban na kasama mo na hindi lang nasa posisyon, nasa profesyon, kundi certain constituencies na sumasama sa iyo para ipaglaban yung mga kalayaan mo. Yun lang naman eh.
Okay. Vergel Santos ng Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility. Sir, always a pleasure. Maraming salamat.
Guys, salamat ha.
Thank you.
And that is it for the Chiefs. We hope it was discussed. We'll keep the conversation going. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Paminco of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.